Welcome to South Asian Environment Dialogue. This is a weekly program which has been brought on by the Climate Channel Canada in collaboration with the Plurals India and the No TV Bangla, a major Bangladeshi YouTube channel. And as you all know, who see this program regularly, that we try to discuss the issues pertaining to South Asia, sometimes throughout South Asia, sometimes kind of involving 2 or 3 countries. Now we are going to discuss an issue today, which is, I think, one of the outstanding issue of importance of deliberation, of debate in South Asia for the last decade or more. Teesta water. Water is in any way a contentious issue in South Asia. And Teesta is one of the major cog in the wheel. Since, I think, almost more than a decade, we have been deliberating the Teesta water sharing between India and Bangladesh, more precisely between the state of West Bengal in India and Bangladesh. There has been political manifestation on that. There are implications of various kinds, but still we are yet to reach a permanent solution, so to say. So where do we stand? Recently, a major international river conference has been held in Bangladesh by ActionAid, the 7th International Water Conference. We can see at the backdrop of Farah, Kabir, who is the head of Bangladesh ActionAid. And that conference has dealt detailed for 3 days over Teesta. And Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, who's one of the foremost voices on river and water in South Asia, a professor in Dhaka University on International Relations, is also an integral part of that conference. So very thankful, Farah Kabirji, to have you, to have Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, and also Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, who is the director of Observation Foundation India, who is also working at length, an ecological economist by profession. He's working at length on the issues of river, of water, precisely also with this stuff. So I think I have a great panel today to discuss this outstanding issue. I know that there have been discussions galore on this issue, but I think time is up to have perhaps a bit of a new narrative. So let's try what we can do on this 40 minutes or so on this stuff. And let me start with Madam Yu, Farah Kabirji. What transpired in this conference? I understand it was more between the civil society, kind of a track to deliberation, though there have been few, I think, from officials from Bangladesh as well. So where, I know it's early days, but still, what are the major takeaways from the conference so far?
Oh, thank you, Jayanta. I was going to pun on your word, outstanding. It is outstanding. And the solutions are, the matter has not been resolved for decades now. So actually, Bangladesh has been very much advocating for the rights of the rivers and trying to raise awareness on water, because water is a critical part of our life. It's we often want to talk about it as a strategic resource, but we have also heard other experts talking about it as a relationship. And Teesta is one of the most important rivers in Bangladesh. It's one of the 4th biggest river. It's transboundary, and it is the home for 21 million people by as far as the statistics that we have available, and half of them are women. So it's very important to try and understand, because if you are with the community, like for ActionAid, it is the people's issues, their empowerment, their knowledge, indigenous leadership. This is what we work with. And when you go there, you find that it is real suffering in dry season. And it's also another form of real suffering in the rainy season. So there's either too much water or there's no water. And this has impacted in so many ways. It's a multi-dimensional implication for the communities that live around Teesta. And it's also a bilateral issue. It's a geopolitical issue. It is a people's issue. It's also the issue of engineers and dam experts. And so it can, you can come to this conversation, this discussion about Teesta from any one of them. And this is why we have organized as a part of our flagship event, which is the International Conference on Water, the 7th one, focusing on Teesta. And it was with the objective to create exchange, dialogue, discussion, and also try to change our mindsets and come up with a narrative.
What came out of it?
I think what came out of it was that, you have to change the lens through which you look at river or water. And, there is a discussion going on out there about water and climate change, but not necessarily making that link, that water, river, and justice and people. So everybody comes from different resources, and water can be a resource because you're packaging it and selling
any
it.
Any specific kind of decision, any specific program has been kind of come out of it, or you are working on that?
Oh, okay. The outcome, of course, we ActionAid will hold the next 8th international conference. ActionAid has also offered a fellowship to do more research around Teesta. And we are looking at setting up a living museum with the children's art, because in this program, there were a number of paintings which had been done by children and their perspective of river.
Of the river. Very important, the new generation.
And river in general.
Fine. Let's come back to you to discuss more of the outcome and the deliberation, not necessarily the outcome, the deliberation that happened during the conference. But let's go to the real thing, that's the politics part of it. Imtiaz Saab, we saw when 1996, the Ganga Treaty was inked. Once the Ganga Treaty was inked, the next kind of agenda was Teesta. And Bangladesh has been kind of saying that there should be an agreement. There was temporary agreement, there was draft, there was almost signing even, and then it didn't materialize. The geopolitics between India and Bangladesh, more precisely Bangladesh and West Bengal, state of West Bengal, and also West Bengal and the central government of India. So where do we stand right now, from Bangladesh?
Thank you, Jayanta. Well, a couple of things. I think the problem with the river and sharing rivers, there has always been different perspectives. One, of course, is the hegemonic, the engineering perspective in that, and which calls for sharing the water. And that has been a serious problem from some of us who are dubbed as critical hydrologists or critical whatever social scientists, because that's one particular definition. Even if you read Jayanta's work, you will see that a river is not only water; it also consists of energy, biodiversity, and sediment. So what are we sharing, and why are we fooling people year after year? Who's going to share the sediment? Who's going to share the energy? What about the biodiversity? So there has been quite a gap between this, what I would regard as a hegemonic engineering perspective, which is a dominant perspective, and it has become the state perspective. That's unfortunately the other part. That's the other unfortunate part. Whereas you have a critical hydrologist, as I said, you have Jayanta Bandhavata. I would also include Kalyan Rudro in that group. Jayanta Basu yourself is also part of that critical hydrologist. And of course, we also have from, and also knowing Nilanjan work. So what I'm trying to point out that these perspectives need to meet somewhere. You can't have a gap of this magnitude. This is one part of it where we have been, we had a manifesto way back, myself, Ashish Nandi, and Ajay Dikshit, again, a hydrologist, flagging a South Asian water manifesto years back and saying that river is life, river is entity. Now that has come that has somehow got materialized in a court judgment in Bangladesh, where all the rivers are now dubbed as living entities. So it's an improvement, I would say. Now, what in Teesta, what has happened after quite a lull, because you had this a kind of a fanfare back in 2011 when everybody was hyped up because there was an agreement was ready, and then
almost
suddenly
ready to be signed.
Almost ready to be signed, and then suddenly Prime Minister Manmohan said, no, I have to take permission from Mamata Banerjee. Now I've written on it. I see, somehow everybody is trying to blame Mamata Banerjee, but I see merit in what she is saying, because by the time the water comes to West Bengal, you don't really have water, because nobody talks about Sikkim. Nobody is talking about X number 31 dams, and this is Indian
in the
sources.
Sikkim, yes, right.
I'm not making Bangladesh sources. 30 plus dams. Now, if you make so many dams up there, where will water come from? So now Bangladesh, there has been some suggestion that
very, very interesting. You're saying that you are not accusing Mamata Banerjee per se. That is was deviating from the normal narrative of the Bangladesh. That is the normal narrative of Bangladesh, that Mamata Banerjee is responsible for not giving the water. But you are saying that she has some merits, whatever she's doing, kind of demanding for.
But Jayanta, I think it's a Delhi's perspective that Mamata is not giving. I don't think. Exactly. I don't think it's a Bangladesh perspective. Our perspective probably is India is not giving. We don't want to go
country to country. It's country to country.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We don't want to go into whatever is happening.
The internal implications of India.
But as an academic, I see merit in Mamata Banerjee's contention.
Great. I'm just going to Nilanjan with that one. Nilanjan, you have been working with Teesta, the entire gamut of rivers. Let's start the point that I think Professor Imtiaz Ahmed has flagged off. That not the Mamata Banerjee, but that is kind of for a journalist, that is more kind of I would say fodder. But I would like to go to a previous point. That's just only water. The engineering mindset of dealing with the problem and settling the problem might be the trigger, might be the problem it's in itself. What's your take on that?
Let me take the cue from Dr. Farah Kabir and also from Imtiaz. There is one very critical element that Ms. Farah Kabir mentioned. And this is something that we theorized, I and Professor Jayanta Bandyopadhyay together in the 2009 paper, that if you look at the Himalayan river system, this system is essentially a development paradox in one sense. Ample water, ample poverty. And there is this entire, I would say, development thinking, which states that if you have ample resource, then that is essentially the source to development on the one hand. Now, this is the region where you have this kind of a paradox. Now, on the other hand, what you have is the colonial engineering paradigm, which is still dominating the entire water governance thinking in South Asia. I'm not saying India, it's South Asia as such, whether it is Nepal, whether it is Bangladesh, whichever is, Pakistan, whatever it is. And not only that, this paradigm has been institutionalized in not only the form of, suppose, say, BUET or the IIT, but in the form of another brick and mortar institution, which dominates to a large extent several big brick and mortar institutions. One such brick and mortar institution in India happens to be the Central Water Commission, infested with engineers. So what is the solution? Well, water, what is water? To them, water is a stock of resource, which should be stocked, saved in a particular reservoir, and should be used as per
distributed.
Exactly. Now, let me again come back to what Imtiaz mentioned, quoting Professor Bandyopadhyay, and I also use that profusely, in fact, in my writings, the perspective of waves, water, energy, biodiversity, sediment. What is a river? A river is a dynamic equilibrium of the waves, water, energy, biodiversity, sediment. Now, in fact, if I intend to perturb this equilibrium in some way or the other, suppose this is the flow. So water is not a stock. It's a flow of these waves, right? It's not a stock. So if I want to perturb this flow and I construct a dam or a barrage, let's think, suppose I constructed the Farakka barrage at one point in time. So what happened? or suppose I construct hydropower barrages all across 30 hydropower barrages in Sikkim, or say hydropower dams say, over the Brahmaputra, whatever. And I call them, well, what are these? These are essentially run-of-the-river projects. It's not going to impede over the flow regime, but it does, because when in fact I want to extract the energy, hydropower is essentially extracting the energy that the flow regime has. What is dropped? The sediment. What is perturbed? The entire biodiversity, the basin ecosystem, movement of fisheries. What are we losing out? Various species. Now, if you talk of the Teesta, what has happened? So, suppose say the upstream interventions, yes, 30 dams. What have these 30 dams, hydropower projects done? Some of them, most of them are non-operational. If in fact, you and I know that we have seen almost 20 of them are non-operational, but the structure exists. And if the structure exists, it fragments the entire river.
Yes, absolutely.
So the entire integrity of the ecosystem has been compromised. Now, this is not a problem during the high season flows. The problem entirely arises with essentially the dry season, right? Now, when the British engineers came to India, their perspective was we are going to construct dams and barrages and reservoirs. The idea is that we are creating, essentially, this is capital expenditure for us. Why capital expenditure? Because we have to ensure the lagan, the revenue, so that water is distributed all across the fields, and we ensure our revenue even during, suppose, say there is a drought or whatever. This was the idea. So they had essentially that kind of a perspective that infrastructure.
What about now? What about now? That is the British perspective.
Now the issue is that which you have mentioned, the other speakers also mentioned, that what is this the subjected to? I call this entire phenomenon the phenomenon of conflictual federalism. It's a two-level game. Water is a state subject as per the Indian Constitution.
I think a concurrent subject. It is
no, it is also in the state list.
Also in the state, okay.
It is also in the state list.
But both concurrent and state.
Yes, subject to 56(1) of the Indian Constitution, through which essentially the center can intervene. But that only happens in the case of interstate rivers.
Right.
Now, issue is that you cannot make any move without essentially concurrence of the state. That is why you will find that when essentially we had the GWA, that is the Ganges Water Agreement, the entire deal was sweetened by Ashim Dasgupta, Jyoti Basu. Essentially, Ashim Dasgupta, the finance minister of West Bengal.
And Jyoti Basu, the Darwin chief minister, was given.
Yes, and Ashim
Dasgupta, the whole process
has to be. So the states.
But that was not done for the. That was not done for the Teesta.
Now, in the Teesta, in fact, this is something very interesting that in 1996. It is the same dispensation that played a role in 2011. It was again, that was the Congress and this was the UPA. So it's the same dispensation. The then finance minister of India was the prime minister of India at this point in time. And somehow this entire thing, they went ahead, they committed on the basis of the 1984 agreement, 42.5% or 37.5% and all those things. Now, again, you see, let me again come back to what Imtiaz mentioned.
Nilanjan, I'll come back to that. But let's take this forward a bit to Farah Kabirji. Very interesting because I really would like to know your point that Professor Ahmed mentioned and Nilanjan also kind of agreed that this whole kind of an engineering-based mindset. So government has its own way of working. All the governments across the world, be it Indian government, be it Bangladesh government, they have their own way of working. But see, it's like an organization like Action Aid, which is a civil society organization. When this kind of a problem continues between the government, how will you feel that the track too should go on between the people like you, Nilanjan, Professor Ahmed, and many others who work across the country, across the borders on this issue of Teesta, and who may be thinking differently, not necessarily just taking water, a river as a resource. So what is the civil society kind of scenario situation right now on this stuff? Is there any initiative on this, on civil society, to take people from both sides and try to find out something run of the middle kind of thing?
I mean, I would say the reason for organizations like Action Aid to engage is the impact on the people and the communities living there. And therefore, we got involved. Now, what gives us the the strength to bring this to the table is the voices of the people and what is actually happening. So we are there, we are on the ground, we are trying to record, we are trying to monitor. We are not academics, but then we engage with academics who bring in their principles, their discipline or their analytical tools. And we also engage with the media, with the young people. So to answer your question, there is definitely initiatives by organizations like ours. There is initiative like Teesta Bachao Andolon, which is a mobilization of civil society, of different activists on the ground. And then we are organizing the international conferences, which is a platform. And that brings in advocates from the region, advocates beyond. And in this platform, we try to bring in policymakers and the government bureaucrats and officials. And, you know, it has been one of our advocacy that river be recognized. And then there was a specific legislative advocacy around Turag River, which the outcome of which is now being celebrated because it covers all rivers in the country. Okay. So the leading to these kind of movements, we create the information, we try to help and do the research, we are with community voices, we bring it. Right. But the problem is that the different agencies of the government give you different messages. There is debate going, and this is why I started by saying that one of the reasons ActionAid got involved was to demystify, because you won't understand what we are talking about. No, it's very highly technical. If you go to the engineers, they'll tell you. The bureaucrats will tell you it's a bilateral issue, it's political issue, it's international relations. I as a citizen will understand, but nobody, I as a citizen want to understand.
Absolutely.
It is impacting my life, my livelihood, my movement. My daughter is being married off at an early age. I have to move home 3 times.
And I have all the right. I have all the right to know that. I have all the right.
So how do you get to know? I mean, you know, we have the Right to Information Act and we have the commission, but that has to be again translated into action. So again, this is a process by engaging with the community and, you know, in the media or the academics.
I'll come to you because you just mentioned about the involving of media and community. There's an interesting example of Sundarbans, where the community, media, and the civil society and the academics of the two countries working together and try to bring about some pressure on the government to come to a tangible solution. So whether it is possible?
May I intervene here? We do that, but then we become very nationalistic and chauvinist. We in South Asia, we do start with that on the issue, but then the information coming from one country to another, it's viewed with the nationalistic lens. And we have a tendency to try and negate the reality.
We perhaps need to go beyond that. This nationalistic and chauvinistic attitude will not take any of us to anywhere. So I think that's very important. Imtiaz, let's come to the grill of politics. See, Bangladesh and India right now, as I understand, the issue is kind of a stagnant issue because of the standoff between the West Bengal government and the government of India in the same position. And unless that has been sorted out, as Nilanjan was pointing out, of the constitutional responsibilities of the both center and state, nothing is going to happen in a way. Despite the fact Mamata Banerjee has best of a relationship with Sheikh Hasina ji, but I think that's much bigger than that. So, considering the political situation, official political situation that we are right now, how the academics, the researchers, how the track 2 can be taken forward? What is the, if we can say, a SWOT analysis, the strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat of this whole process? How you do a prescription of going ahead with the Teesta deliberation?
I think in last 10 years, it has become quite clear for any Bangladeshi that for Delhi and Kolkata to agree on the 2011 agreement would be difficult. And it has nothing to do with Mamata Banerjee. You know, my understanding of politics, as I see, even if today there is a different regime in Kolkata,
Right.
believe it or not, they would also not be able to sign it. And the reason is of course, the interest of West Bengal and of course, the electoral politics that goes with it. All these people have to represent groups where the Teesta flow. Now, West Bengal also has made some, barrage or, at least to storage water and whatever in several areas. And it clearly shows that in winter season, you don't have. So what Bangladesh, I think, and I'm not an advocate of that, but the point here is Bangladesh, year after year, waiting, probably thought that the best would be to give up on whole issue and then think of resolving it within Bangladesh. Now, how do you do it? Well, one easy way of doing it is that I think they calculated that during the rainy season, there is more water, which is true. Right. If they can store that water, and at the same time, there would be serious dredging of the place. And they also know that it would be very costly. And then the issue became geopolitics, because the point is, where will cost come? Who is going to, provide the funds? I guess there is some news that China showed interest. China showed interest on this, and immediately it became geopolitical. Now, the point I was raising on the very first day and also today is that, whenever we think about geopolitics, we always think of conflict, because historically geopolitics is part of conflict. All about conflict. As an IR student, I can understand that. But my take on that is, you can also think of geopolitics of cooperation, because why are you thinking that we can't cooperate? And I said, you can go for a win-win situation. You need to have faith in Bangladesh. And as I said, our foreign policy principle becomes very important here. That is friendship towards all, malice towards none. We have never taken enemy, of our neighboring countries' enemies to be our enemies. We have already made that clear. We always say it is their issue. We want to remain friends with everyone. So I guess this may not be an ideal, what you call solution, but if that can be done, and in here, engineers also differ in many ways. If that can be done in the short term, before this idea gets filtered, before this idea webs get filtered into people's mind, it's very difficult to change people's mind, change government people on this idea of, of webs, because as I said, Nodi is much more easier to understand if you take Nodi to be Pran, Atta, and Shutti, which and make you easy to understand why you can't play with Nodi, because it is Pran, Atta, and Shutti. And this is way Upanishad. So people, difficult to change. And I am very realistic, part of my discipline will tell me to be realistic.
You are not very optimistic of a agreement on Teesta in time soon.
Wait, 31 dams, come on, let's be serious. You're not
Where's the water?
Even if it is not workable, yes. And nobody talks about Sikkim. Sikkim has to be brought in. And if anybody reading Kalyan Rudra's report would understand, you have gone through it. My point here is, without Sikkim, how can you resolve the issue of Teesta? Now,
very important, because you have triggered that. Nilanjan, as Imtiaz mentioned about the report that being done by government of West Bengal, that is not a report in public domain, but few of us have the chance to kind of talk about it and have seen it and write about it. Basic point is that the report is mentioning during the dry season, 1/16 of the water is there actually in the river than what is required by both countries taken together. And one fundamental point is both the dam in Indian side and the Bangladesh side were done to facilitate and promote the Aman, the monsoon time kind of thing, but now it is being turned to Bodo, so dry season cultivation. So that's the problem. So how you say it? You have seen it, Nilanjan. So the same question that I asked Professor Ahmed, standing now in 2022 January, how you see the Teesta so-called agreement, quote unquote, proceeding?
Before the agreement, let us understand one thing, that what we have not been looking at. We have been talking about politics. We have been talking about, suppose say, the federal politics, geopolitics, and all other things. We have been talking about webs, integrated approach. What we have not been talking about is the economics. Let's understand the economics. First of all, it is essentially the conflict is between the two nations centers around irrigated Boro paddy, which has a crop water requirement of around 1800 to 2800 millimeters. That is 10 times of any of the drier crops that could have been done out there. In fact, whether in West Bengal or in Bangladesh, I know that this region is a paddy growing region, but there has been an increase in acreage over time. If you look at the changes in acreage in the Teesta basin of irrigated paddy, you will find that it is to the tune of 5 to 7 times than what prevailed in the 60s and the 70s. Why did this happen? This is also because of the fact that technology developed. That is one. Second is that it's a flawed food policy, food security policy in this part of the world. As far as India is concerned, we promoted rice and wheat through the minimum support price regime, through the green revolution. The water consuming crops have been promoted through that. Rather, what we disincentivized was the production of sorghum, the production of ragi, the production of bajra, which could have been, in fact, this is also the case with the Kaveri basin, with the case, in fact, in the Indus itself, that the minimum support price ever since the 1980s of paddy has been increasing at a much, much faster rate than, in fact, of the drier alternatives. And similarly, in case of Bangladesh, infrastructure has been developed to such an extent, and paddy, there's this entire penchant for paddy, dry season paddy is so much that the entire acreage has been increasing in the entire basin, thereby increasing the demand for water during the dry season. So where is the integrated approach? We cannot only talk about, suppose, say, energy and biodiversity. We also need to think about how can we release that water. If we have to release that water, we need essentially less water consuming crops. Farmers have to be trained through counseling, through price signals, through better procurement mechanism. Our Food Corporation of India procures paddy and wheat mostly. Why don't they, in fact, go to the farmers and say that, no, we are going to procure drier crops at a much more lucrative price? So this,
so you are basically advocating. You are basically advocating to
in one
change
sentence.
this.
Let me come in one sentence. Let me come in one sentence. In one sentence, it is an integrated approach. An integrated approach which looks at the economics, A, B, the biodiversity, C, the entire aspect of institutions. So it has to be a more umbrella level river basin approach, which has to prevail. Otherwise, we are again going to, it doesn't matter whether we have an agreement or not. It's an issue of governance on both sides together.
A very quick supplementary question, Nilanjan. Professor Ahmed talked about the Sikkim factor. We also saw how the entire gamut of water being kind of stopped throughout the Sikkim area. So how do you feel? So at one side, it has to be taken between India and Bangladesh. But also, I think the state level, India, West Bengal, Sikkim need to talk together, perhaps with the government of West India, to kind of settle this issue, how it goes in Teesta. But I don't know of any initiative between the two states to discuss the Teesta. We have been talking a lot about India, Bangladesh, but we are not talking about West Bengal and Sikkim. So what do you feel about it?
What I feel about it is that, first of all, we have to, whether it is in India or in large parts of South Asia, the data has to be in public domain. We cannot keep on classifying data. We cannot, this entire,
you don't know anything about it, you don't need to know.
Let me put this very straight. At this point in time, as an individual researcher, I have clear suspicion about the estimates of Kolya and Rudro, whether it's really 1/16 or not. I want to check whether it's really 1/16 or not.
Right.
Why is that data not being placed in public domain?
Right.
how has he essentially estimated the entire crop water requirement of this part of the basin? On what basis has this 1/16 been arrived at? Secondly, who is going to estimate the environmental water requirements? Where is that demand, environmental water demand? Where is the, so I want the total environmental flows assessment of this river basin, and on the basis of that, only in fact the entire allocation can happen. And that can happen on this e-flows assessment is a negotiated approach. We have to reach it through that kind of an approach.
Absolutely. The negotiated approach is the requirement. Let me, we are kind of coming to the last 10, 12 minutes of this program. Let's start with Farah, and then I'll come to other Professor Ahmed and Nilanjan. Mamata Banerjee, I think a couple of years back, mentioned about one thing as a counterpoint to Teesta. I'm not saying that she's an academic or she has adequate research to kind of make that claim, but she might have made the claim as a politician, but I'm taking the cue from it. She said that you leave aside Teesta, there are other rivers in the region from where we can give water. So basically, if you kind of extrapolate it into an academic language, it boils down to a basin approach. India and Bangladesh share 54 rivers. Why we are so much adamant about two rivers, Ganga and Teesta? What about the other rivers? If you look at the 54 rivers, 45 being originated from India, about 5 or 6 from Bangladesh, and rest 3 from Bhutan and that region. So why can't we have a larger, wider basin-based approach to solve this issue of water sharing between the kind of neighboring countries? We are having not only the problems of India, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, then China is also an elephant in the room. Farah, starting from you, can't we expand that ambit? And yes, Teesta is important, but why don't we take the other rivers in the basin to understand how we can share water to the advantage of both, the win-win scenario that Imtiaz Saab was talking about. Farah.
If I was the decision maker, definitely. I think for a long time, the basin approach has been put on the table. But there is, I think, very important points here. One is, do our policymakers want to resolve? Is the economics in favor of those who are making the decision? Because as far as the people are concerned, as far as the social impact, the environmental impact, there is no confusion. When you go on the ground, when you go to this, they want this to be resolved. And it's got such serious implications, social and political, economically. And in country also, you were talking about Sikkim. We saw some research and video documentary by young researchers from Sikkim. And in their own country, they were being obstructed from raising their issues, asking for information. So similarly here also. So I think that there is no debate about not moving to a basin approach, but how we convince the mindset of the negotiators and our own bureaucracy. This is one thing. The only way to do that is mobilization and bringing people's voices. We have to keep harping, because I think another important point is that data and its interpretation. Yesterday there was a debate about whether it's a 31 dams or there are 25 dams. What difference does it make to me if I'm living around the Teesta and not getting water? You're debating about 5% of the water will be taken up by each of the dams. So 5% multiply, blah, blah, blah. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't see water in the dry season. And then suddenly there are floods. You open the gates and I'm inundated. And you're not solving this problem. So for the people of Teesta, we want this to be solved. The people of Sikkim, they want it to be solved. So I think it's not the people have any debates. It's how we change the narrative, the mindset of the negotiators. And how do we define to them that it's in their interest? Because I think the best hook today is climate change. Absolutely. That whatever you do, things are beyond your control. You can't play the same game and take the same approach as you did in the 60s, 70s. Today we have the knowledge and the science showing us that climate change is happening. And that's the hook we need to hang on.
Very important hook. You mentioned about the climate change. I think extremely important hook to kind of proceed in this particular issue. Great, Farah. I think Imtiaz Saab, the same question, the basin approach. Farah mentioned about the limitations of it. It seems the limitations of the negotiators. Negotiators don't want to see beyond the river, beyond the water of the river, nothing else. So, what's your take? How this whole basin approach? First of all, whether this basin approach should be taken forward, and if it is, how it is. I remember when Farah was talking about the young people being obstructed from doing video and all. Actually, myself and Nilanjan met the former chief secretary of Sikkim. Nilanjan, you may remember the former chief secretary of Sikkim. He wrote a 500-page book, and he actually gifted one to me with the allegations how the Dadan Sikkim government has been completely plundering the environmental resources of the state, including the river Teesta. So it boils down to that point. Even former chief secretary is so aghast about the whole process. So how you see this? How you can change the negotiators? You can change the names, but they remain same. Imtiaz Saab.
Well, I think there are several ways of answering a question. One would be the affected citizens of Teesta. There is already, an outfit of that kind. Need to probably join hands with Teesta Bachao Andolon in Bangladesh. So there should be, you can talk it track 3 or track 4, I don't know, whatever, because there seems to be people in Sikkim also getting affected. It's not like everybody is enjoying whatever is being done in their name or in their territory. So I guess more interactions probably would work. But now what has happened, if I say 2022 or in last 3-4 years, why this has become a geopolitical issue. You see, if you look at from a basin point of view, and Bangladesh has always been talking about a basin approach, it has come in what you call even in 2011, in 2010 agreement, was in 2010 with Manmohan Singh and
Sheikh Hasina,
right.
Yes.
Even there you have a basin approach, etc. I think it's mentioned somewhere. But the point here is basin approach would also bring geopolitics, because they're also, you can't...
bigger geopolitics.
Bigger geopolitics. You can't have a basin approach without China, let's put it that way. Of course, you're going to have Nepal and Bhutan join in. And this is where I think the mindset in some of the policy makers, particularly in Delhi, I don't think are still ready for that bigger geopolitics, given some of the contestation in other areas they have with China. So now what has happened, if you don't go for a basin approach, if you don't do anything, keep it for year after year, as it has now happened, 2011, and we are talking 2022, Bangladesh is now thinking of an approach. Now there also China comes in. So my point here is it's high time we get out of our mindset that we have. We need to resolve the issue, because by keeping that issue, it's not going to help in any way, because people will always find ways of doing it. Even if they see it's a short-term gain and long-term loss, they will go for a short-term gain. And that's the point I'm saying. So yes, the storage in Bangladesh case, inside Bangladesh, probably would have other issues with the environment. But the point here is people want water in the dry season. Now, how you do it? Now, somehow Bangladesh is blessed because bulk of our river water is rainwater. Don't forget that. It's 80% is rainwater. So we are blessed. But on the top of that, what happens during the rainy season, that you get so much water from the top, and the whole issue here is during the dry season, because there's less water, the sediment gets hardened. That's why we have this repeated floods. We heard this time, Professor Ainun Nishat saying that almost this was getting diverted towards Lalmonirhat and probably would have gone in a different direction. So the point here is you would be also looking at an environment, if you keep as it is, will go in different direction. That's not going to stop. So year after year, it's already 10 years, something has to be done. So here I think it's high time that an out-of-box thinking ought to be there. And I will go back with Jayanta Bandyopadhyay with the web's idea. And it's high time to look into what can be done differently. Right. But if we don't do anything, people will not stop, and it will become a geopolitical issue one way or other.
Nilanjan, very important point Professor Ahmed mentioned, that if you don't do anything, right now, apparently the government of India and government of Bangladesh, it seems that they have stopped talking and thinking about this stuff. So it is not going to help. You have to do something about it. You have to keep on talking, try to find out a solution. And what is the problem in Bangladesh today? Maybe the problem of West Bengal tomorrow. Sikkim completely cutting off the water. So it's going to affect everybody around. So two C's coming into the picture, Nilanjan. Two of your favorite C's. One is China and one is climate change. So climate change is complicating the issue, because if you look at the figures in the glacier, out of 32 or 34 glaciers contributing to Teesta, 25 are being receding. That's the figure that we have. So climate change is playing its role. China is playing a geopolitical role. So final point, Nilanjan, how we go forward and how the basin approach can be taken forward, if at all it can be taken forward?
First of all, I have 3 points to mention. First is that when we talk about the basin approach, we have to define what is the basin. Are we talking about the entire GBM, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna basin? That approach? No, that is not feasible. Let's face it. India has indulged in bilateralism so far when it comes to water negotiations. And of course, China is the elephant in the room. We have a bilateral treaty as far as Brahmaputra is concerned on data sharing with China. That too is a flawed agreement. So whether it's from the Chinese side or from the Indian side, that doesn't, in fact, those 3 stations doesn't predict anything. That is one. Second is, when we talk about the most moot point at this point in time, essentially the solution has to come from the ground. The solution, how can it come from the ground? It depends solely on demand side management of water during the dry season. And one of the critical modes of demand management of water is essentially restricting this unbridled penchant for paddy, whether it's through market intervention, whether it's through governmental intervention, whether it's through procurement mechanism, whether it's through counseling, training of farmers, whatever it is, it has to happen. It is not only for Sikkim, not only for the sake of drying rivers, but also take another elephant in the room, that is climate change. We have to think of that in the shorter and medium and the longer run. So this has, now for that, who is going to bring about this change? Of course, this depends on informed activism. Let me use the term informed activism. Activism is not informed as far as South Asia is concerned largely. This is not essentially always the fault of the activists. This is also because of the fact that it is being hindered at an institutional level. Data is not being shared properly in public domain. Even suppose say, I want to indulge in some academic activism. I don't want to go to the field as such. But suppose say, through writings, in fact, writing an op-ed, but I don't have the data. I really don't know that. Many people don't even know that essentially the glacial contribution of the Brahmaputra is barely 5 to 7%. Of the Ganges is barely 4%. Whereas the Indus essentially has to the tune of 55 to 60% of glacial contribution. So what will be the impact of climate change on these 3 major Himalayan rivers? One needs to understand this thing, but this data is not there. So informed activism, whether it is by academicians,
let's quickly go back to the point you were making.
Let me just finish this.
If it is on GBM, what is the basin we're talking about?
Whether it is by academicians, NGOs, or whosoever, or activists, so science has to essentially lead to, it should be driven by science, not without science, not only it's people's science. Okay, fine. Now I come to your question. So please.
No, I was saying that you were saying that GBM might not be the appropriate bigger basin. So for Teesta or the rivers around North Bengal and Bangladesh, what's the basin you are thinking should be considered?
Suppose if I call it a sub-basin, if I call Teesta a sub-basin, right? Then in fact, who are the players in this entire system? It starts from, it has to be a bottom-up approach, say, starting from the community, involve Sikkim in the game, involve state of India, involve West Bengal, involve Bangladesh, involve the various NGOs, and then in fact, can you really think of creating some form of an institutional intervention, which can look at the basin right from the top?
Kind of a Mekong model. Kind of a Mekong model.
Mekong is very much a bottom-up approach. If you look at the institution, and it's a combination rather, not merely bottom-up. It has, suppose, say, even the top-down institution as well as a
very important,
approach.
Nilanjan. I think Nilanjan has flagged a very important point. I was trying to conclude here, but very quickly to take response of Farahji and Imtiaz first. Farah Kabir, this sub-basin approach that Nilanjan is talking about, and also the stakeholders and the negotiated approach considering climate change. This seems to be also, you mentioned about climate change. This should be the way forward. You agree on that?
Well, I need to know more about the sub-basin, and that's not my forte. I have to develop understanding. But what I would say that there is no reason to move away from the discourse on climate change and the connection between climate change and what is happening. And this is why I said earlier that some things are beyond the politics and beyond our control, beyond the approach that we have. I just want to add something that Nilanjan said, that informed activism. Now, activists on the ground are passionate because of the impacts on their life. It is also the responsibility of experts to share with them. But then experts are being obstructed because, again, there is the data and information isn't there. But what a general citizen and activist finds is two experts don't agree. And we are fed different views and we are lost. So we have to, again, build our argument, build our activism against the impact on the social impact, on displacement, on river erosion.
Yes,
on
there are various
change.
layers. There are various layers.
It's very layered, and we want academics, experts, and all of us to think of ourselves as not about separating us on one particular issue, on one particular end goal. We should cooperate. We should bring our energies together and be activists.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I completely agree with you that the marriage between the academicians, their outputs, and that informed activism that Nilanjan talks about has to go hand in hand. It can't go in isolation. Imtiaz Saab, sub-basin, climate change, focus to take it forward. You agree on that?
Since we are in the middle of a pandemic, let us be very clear. Territoriality, nationalism, nation state are not the way for water issues to be resolved. Simple as that. There was good reason why Rabindranath was against nationalism. If you read, he was very, very perceptive way back, saying that it's a heartless doctrine which has done harm to India. And I'm sure he meant the big India that we had at that particular time. Water cannot be nationalized, unless you have that mindset. It's just like virus, more vaccine nationalism, more problem you are creating for yourself. Look at the West, how they're suffering. Had they had, believe it or not, in 2020, in January, if they had met all the global leaders, and if they could have collaborated at that particular time, they could have kept this COVID-19 into as an epidemic and not make it into a pandemic. They could have done it. So similarly, here in the case, it is going to become bigger and bigger because the water is not going to remain straight. Even on the Ganges, on the Farakka, and I go back to Colin Ruddo arguing, there's a map of which Colin Ruddo published showing how the Farakka has shifted, how the Ganges has shifted already, bypassing the Farakka barrage. So my point here is rivers are living entities. Don't mess around with them. Quicker we have that mindset, I think the chances are we'll be able to resolve them. But I have hope in human beings, tremendous hope. I'm sure we can work it out.
Nilanjan, you have hope that this is now with the climate change, the pandemic, all these seas coming together, and you feel that there'll be some way forward on Teesta, if not by the government, but by the track too. Very quickly, we just come to the...
That is the only hope if it can work. So, in fact, it has to be informed activism on the ground. It has to be led by civil society, led by NGOs, led by academicians. And more importantly, in fact, the penetration has to happen, penetration of this knowledge and information base somehow.
Fine.
So,
I think yes.
So more importantly, what we have to develop is a transdisciplinary knowledge base by way of which engineering sciences, ecological sciences, international relations, strategic studies, ecological economics, fluvial geomorphology, I mean, all these things come together, as also people's science.
Also the communication.
So communication, of course. So everything has to come together to form a transdisciplinary framework of river governance. And I'm not talking about Teesta only. I'm talking about the rivers of South Asia. And that's the way to govern them.
Thank you. I think it's a fascinating discussion. Normally, when you talk about Teesta, we kind of segregate ourselves to a narrow zone. But thankfully, thanks to the very, very, I think, eminent panelists, we could actually expand it. And as I understand, from the last almost 40, 50 minutes discussion, 2-3 points came out. One, there has to be a negotiated approach within the people at large. And to make that negotiated approach, the people need to get data. The ground level organizations, as Farah Kabir said, they need data. Perhaps academicians should come forward and do an alliance with the people who are working at ground to provide whatever information is there so they can be informed. There can be informed decision on behalf of the people on ground. That's number one. Number two, I think climate change can play a dual role here. In one side, climate change is minimizing the water in Teesta. On the other side, it can build up the threat perception. Perhaps we need a threat perception to do the geopolitics in a different way. COVID showed us how it can be done. When the African countries are affected by climate change, they are fighting among themselves on ground, 15 countries. They come to a COP and work together. Why South Asia can't do that? Why India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, being the three most polluted countries, can't talk together? Why three most affected countries of climate change can't work together? I think if the politicians and the leaders cannot understand it, you people, the people leaders, the academicians, perhaps need to forge it. With that hope, we conclude today, but we really, really hope that this discussion will be taken forward. The people in this panel are, I think, extremely efficient to take it forward. With that hope, I conclude today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.